Okay, going to go through my case study here. So I went through all the assessments. I'm going to kind of go through my notes here because I am not good at screen recording. Um, but I think I saw a little bit similar with, I think, just some subtle differences compared to what we saw in the presentation videos, which were awesome for the case study here. I saw a little bit of a hip dominant left shift at the bottom. I think he might have mentioned he couldn't tell if it was from the angle. It did look like a little bit more of a left shift to me. Not enough to really consider an entire orientation with these numbers, but enough to say let's pay a little bit of extra attention to it. The overs was a fail on the left, pass on the right. I had very subtle differences here in the hip flexion. The straight leg raise I thought was pretty pronounced. Easier on his left, worse on his right. Femoral IR, bad on his right. Femoral ER, worse on his right. Shoulder flexion, that right side needed some work there. And then getting into, let's see, the shoulder IR, I had 50 on the left, 35 on the right. I thought that was a little bit easier for him. And the abduction 35, 35, pretty even on both sides there. And the adduction, I thought was definitively better on his left versus his right. I thought the imbalance here between the left and right might be what's causing his bench press issues. Regardless, he's probably trying to get this EIR from somewhere, but not getting it. So kind of looking at that, and I thought his trunk rotation was just couldn't get to his right without throwing something out there. For phase one goals, we know he's a narrow ISA. I kind of judged his goals as more power, linear speed and strength, and then movement-wise, restores right hip IR, sagittal plane orientation, better squat, hip flexion, obviously SLR 60 degrees, getting his shoulder ER to 90 on both sides. I hated this part. This is probably contributing to his bench too. I'm guessing that left elbow might tuck a little bit when he gets heavy, and the issue with it in his left side might be causing that. Getting his flexion, these aren't even according up to 120. This should be basically fixed in a week or two. But really athletic goals, better force absorption. So I'm going to treat phase one as a full phase here. I think I'm similar. I don't know if it was you or someone else, but I think I'm similar to being pretty even in what I like to see throughout. So I like the supine cross connect with the compensation bias. I know that's an orientation warm up. However, knowing that Obers was a fail on the left, I'd like to see a little extra attention to that here. I like the lower body rolling. Personally, I think it's an amazing drill for that SLR. And I want to keep that in there. And I like the wall supported reach, especially getting some of that ER space and airflow through opening up that upper back a little bit. So I do things when I structure 4-day workouts, just so you know, I tend to do upper, lower, or some by that. On the upper days, I tend to do more plyometrics, and the lower, I tend to do more speed medicine ball work. So, but I like this warm up and keeping this warm up throughout the phase one. I like the band assisted push to base because I think if we're looking in terms of force absorption, the band assisted work is where we need to see it. I know that is probably going to be a little bit more of a midfoot stance, even though I had his feet in mid to late stance on his movement assessments, but I think shifting those hips back and learning that is an appropriate phase one goal, which the band assisted will help. If I see him getting a little bit too much, or if I see the kind of inability to get this IR on the push to base, I might just do some band assisted deceleration drills more linearly to get him landed easier there. The half kneeling landmine press, just finding the right angle for shoulder flexion. I like the long seated pull downs with him being a narrow, and we can kind of also control that shoulder flexion here. I'm a huge fan of the offset push up plus. Since that left arm, we want to open up a little bit more on the ER side of things. I'm going to put the block on the right since he's got full ER on his right. The door frame lat stretch, I like that one. Again, it's a chance to get some breathing work in, and since he is a narrow, the front, I like to do some accessory and kind of core lighter corrective work at the end with these guys. So I liked the front rack carry to get some space in that upper back and to and I liked the side plank with the reach for that same reason, to maybe even try to get him some shoulder flexion if he's competent in that. I might have him start overhead with this. Day 2, keeping the same warm-up. I like the duck walks for speed as we're trying to get him probably planting a little less on his heel when he runs. It's a good transitional drill for that. The pronated medicine ball rotational throw, I think he's going to have some trouble. Even though he is a little bit mid to late stance, I would like to see him learn to load that hip more so his rotations are cleaner. And I think that's a better phase 1 since he's already kind of there. The 90-degree box squat, 3-second eccentric drill. I'm a big fan of eccentrics early on in the first couple phases because I think they help teach control. I come from the Eric Cressey school. I like the ER from the scapular plane movement here. He doesn't have to go up to down on this one, and it's an additional drill where he can kind of use the rest from here in that case. Front toe elevated split squat, contralateral load. We're kind of keeping him heel on this one. We're teaching that back hip to start to shift in, which I think is important with these rotational throws. If I'm wrong on that, please correct me. I am also a big Pallof press fan. I am just having him do a more standard hold with a deep exhale. This is a good chance to teach him some breathing and recovery between these as well. I also definitely noticed a lot of compensation in the IR, ER, hip flexion, and straight leg raises where opposite legs were turning out. So I'm going to have all 3 phases, a huge hamstring, lateral, and medial emphasis. And then, so he's going to do some iso holds here, foam roller, almost like the warm-up drill, hips barely off ground, so we know he's scooping and tucking, and nutating, or counter-nutating. And then I'm going to have him do I think this was on someone's Instagram, but it's the right hand on block, wall reference, push-up position hold. I think as we transition into those, it's a good spot for him since he's already in the ground too. We're going to go day 3, we're going to do some lateral hops with a non-counter movement, again teaching him to absorb force. These sissy squat sprint starts, which I love. To kind of get him on more of his feet. We're kind of covering all of his ankle mobility bases here. A neutral grip bench press, a little safer on him, dumbbells, feet elevated, a one-arm supported row, an offset push-up plus, bench supported lat pull-downs. This is a great Pat Davidson drill where we use a neutral grip. He can go chest to the bench, and we can kind of control his range based on his shoulder flexion for the day even. We're progressing the rack carry to one arm. I am adding some serratus wall slides in there just as like almost a recovery exercise for him. And I know, again, for that shoulder flexion, it would be really important since I really want to see him at 120 by the end of this phase. Last day, trap bar deadlift. I'm going to focus a little more on speed because I think he's going to get that back loading, midfoot loading here. A toes elevated lateral hinge, again for the same reason. I'm going to add a wall piston iso in there. Usually I would have maybe some rest here, but I like this for the positional corrective aspect of it. I don't think it's going to get him too much shifting, even though this is a more heel mid one. This is a more mid late stance drill. I think we'll be okay here. Bench supported one leg hip thrust. I love the lateral hinge respiration chops. And since we are going to start taking them into IR focus a little bit more, I like the bear crawl with the pause at the end and the crab breathing as well. So that's phase 1. Phase 2, I'd like to see a full toe touch, a full overs pass to start. 60 degrees in his shoulder IR, full flexion on both sides, full cutting abilities. I'd like to get him neutral grip barbell bench pressing. We have one of those here. A slightly higher vertical jump and really start working on his acceleration as we start really getting him in more of that late stance focus here. I like the rolling armbar with screwdriver. I think that really helps with that. The prone propulsion. I want to keep his range of motion, but I also want to keep extension in that left hip, assuming he's now passing his overs. I like the inchworm crawl, especially for a taller basketball player. Again, for the shoulder IRER aspect, we're going to start into some counter movement stuff. I like a counter movement reactive lateral bound here. He can still work on landing mechanics and force absorption. And I like the box jump. I'm going to cue him a little bit taller, so he is landing more mid-stance. We can add the neutral grip barbell bench press in. I know it might not be the most opportune time for it, but his goal is to barbell bench press at some point, and I wouldn't want him to go 4, 5, 6 weeks without having that ability, or he may not come back. Okay, there. I don't know what this is doing. Okay. Anyways, neutral long seated X pull downs. I'm going to start taking him a little more IR in that capacity. All right. Computer hates me here. Okay, wall reference push-up. I'm just adding the wall reference to it now. I'm keeping a 3-point row in there, not bench supported anymore. I'm keeping the rack carry, and I'm adding some dumbbell Ys because I do want to do some strengthening exercises in this back shoulder muscles back there and all of those things, and kind of keep that range of motion, since basketball is such an overhead dominant sport that most people don't realize. Day 2, 2-point toe base starts, getting him more over there. I'm going to do a figure 4 pronated medicine ball throw to get a little more loading and power out of the hips. I'm adding the safety squat bar to a 90-degree box. Even though he might be squatting past 90 degree at this point, I think adding the bar element requires some restriction there. A front heel elevated split squat with a contralateral load. I'm now giving the toe reference here. I'm going to add, I know this is an up and down one, but I'm going to add a Kaiser 90-degree IR from the floor. I want to get as much IR out of him, out of this phase as I can, and I think the building blocks are there for it. I'm eccentric, making his leg curls, and I'm also going to do a wall for reference dead bug, so any of this stuff doesn't potentially lose any of that good shoulder flexion we built on for him. Day 3, band resisted cuts. I'm adding the band resistance now. We're going to do some bounding drills to get him a little more elastic off of his mid to late stance. I'm going to do a one-arm dumbbell bench press. I think he's okay to start getting a little bit more rotation and stabilization out of these. I'm keeping the X pull downs in as well from a different position. I'm going to go to a split stance landmine press now. I might add a little bit of a power or a jerk element to it if he can competently do it. Chest to bench row. Now we're going to start compressing that mid upper back a little bit here. We're going to do some banded leg lowers with an eccentric focus. I want to make sure he still has hip mobility by the end. And I'm keeping the lateral hinge respiratory chops in there again because I just think that really keeps their rotation in. Last day of the phase, we're going to do a split stance trap bar deadlift, a step up. I'm going to actually have him front racking kettlebells on the step up. We're going to load that front a little bit here. I'm going to have him pal-off press from a split stance. I'm going to actually do some lateral sled drags, both for the lateral movement and the pronation, supination of the foot benefit there. And we're going to do some GHR holds, which are just a really hard hamstring iso. Phase 3, I want him bench pressing without pain. I want basically passable tests with only small asymmetries. I tend to go more relative acceleration power. We test their counter movement and non-counter movement and squat jump, and I'd like to see those within about 20% of each other. So a little bit's going to be based on where those tests go. But for normalcy, I'm going to add the rolling patterns in there. I think those are very motor control oriented. It's a good phase 3 one. the respiratory goblet squat kickstand hinge. I'm going to base either of those drills off the day and the specific focus. We're going to add the lateral pogo hops because I want him staying elastic and I want it to be ingrained in his brain. We're going to do some extensive lunge jumps, which combine kind of power and foot elasticity here, along with some reactive bounds for his plyo. He's going to be barbell bench pressing a little bit heavier, 3-point dumbbell rowing a little bit heavier. I'm going to add a banded wall reference push-up so he can really work hard at that top part of it. I might even add the plus part if he's doing it. A low to high Kaiser cable row. Since positionally he'll be confident, I want to keep his upper traps relaxed. I love the respiratory curls, and I think we're at a place where we can start doing some arm work with him as well. Next day, I'm going to do some push-up position starts for acceleration with him, a split stance medicine ball chop into a rotational throw. He'll be competent at cutting by then. He'll be able to absorb force and generate it. So this is a nice transitional one, having confidence in both of those. I'm going to hit pretty hard on the heavier legs, a full front squat, a full RFE split squat. We're going to have a 3-second ISO at the bottom. I don't think any of these require movements paired with them. I'm going to do a front kettlebell rack march. We're going to alternate legs on those and a hip thruster there. I think these are both good accessory movements, both for mechanics and glute work. And then last day 3 here, we are going to do some band resisted cuts. I think that's getting them close to in season. Some resisted starts from a 2-point stance. We have a device for that. An incline alternating arm dumbbell bench press. I want to keep some shoulder work in there for him now since he's probably getting closer to season. I'm going to keep the feet elevated too, positionally speaking for him. I just think that's better for a kid that age. Lateral hinge cable rows. This is a great Eric Cressy move. A wall reference push-up position ISO. I think the positional holds are going to still come into play, so we're going to do a 30-second one there. A split stance landmine row, which might be a little more functional in nature, but we're going to use multiple grips on that. We should be able to get him some speed and a little bit of extra rotation out of that upper body. I'm going to add a kettlebell windmill and some transverse chops here, both overhead stability. He should have the range of motion for the kettlebell, and the transverse chops are going to add that kind of speed and rotational pop that we want to add for him too. And then the last day of that phase, we're going to just trap our deadlift a little heavier, front foot elevated reverse lunge. I'm going to give him a floating heel so we can get a little more mid-late stance. We're going to Palloff press him. I'm going to put him split stance. We're going to add the overhead reach, the progression there, a single leg counter movement squat to a bench, and then we're going to do just all 3 of these as a circuit to kind of give him some volume on his legs, a lateral step up to bench with a front rack position, and another GHR ISO progressing from 5 to 10 seconds and noting the angles. So that should get him there. I think that's a good position. Usually a basketball player is going to have a 4 to 5 month off season. Once we get here, then after phase 3, then we can just work on, that speed strength part of the continuum and, the contrast phase and getting him ready for his season. For the conditioning, I'm going to go with some short duration. This is going to be phase 1 and 2, respiratory intervals. We're going to go 4x400 on the bike. I like the nasal breathing focus. I think the bike has a lot of fluctuating wattages, so we're going to increase that 50 to 75 each round and just monitor his nasal breathing and or heart rate plateaus. I am going to have him doing the quadruped breathing between sets. I'm just going to add 1 in phase 2. Phase 3, for our basketball players, I would continue this focus. However, we do a lot of pool-based intervals for their conditioning. It allows them to work from the ground on up a little bit and get that equal resistance. So I would probably come up with a clever way of doing both of those. And that is